The courtroom was colder than it should have been for a Tuesday in early September. I remember that detail because I kept rubbing my hands together under the table, and my lawyer, Margaret Hill, kept glancing at me like she wanted to ask if I was all right. I wasn't. But I wasn't going to say that, not in front of my brother. Daniel sat 3 feet away, on the other side of the aisle, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He had a small smile on his mouth, the kind he used to wear when we were kids, and he convinced our mother that I was the one who'd broken something. He had never lost that smile. 43 years old, and he still wore it like a weapon. I was 41. I worked as a bookkeeper for a feed and grain supply company in a town outside Macon, Georgia. I drove a 10-year-old Ford. I lived in a 2-bedroom rental with a leaky kitchen faucet that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. By every measure my brother understood, I was nothing. He stood up to address the judge, and I felt my stomach tighten. I had known what he was going to say. Margaret had warned me. She had told me, gently, that family disputes about wills bring out the worst in people, that I should prepare myself for things to be said in open court that could never be unsaid. I had told her I was ready. I wasn't. Your Honor, Daniel began, and his voice carried the easy weight of a man who had spent 20 years selling commercial real estate to people who didn't know they were being overcharged. I want to be clear about something. My sister, Rachel, is a good person. I'm not here to attack her. But the will my father supposedly signed 3 weeks before his death does not reflect the reality of our family. He paused. He looked at me. The smile came back. My father loved Rachel. We all loved Rachel. But she has been, by every objective standard, a failure. She didn't finish college. She has worked the same low-level bookkeeping job for 14 years. She has no savings, no property, no career, no spouse, no children. My father, in his final weeks, was on heavy medication. He was confused. He was, frankly, easily manipulated. And the idea that he would leave the family farm, 312 acres that has been in our family since 1894, to a woman who has never built anything in her life, while leaving me. Who has actually contributed to this family's standing, with nothing but a savings account and his old truck, is not a will. It is a mistake. And I am asking this court to correct it. He sat down. The word failure sat in the air like a smell that wouldn't leave. I heard it again in my head, in his voice. I heard it in my mother's voice from 1998, when I dropped out of nursing school. I heard it in my ex-husband's voice from 2011, when he told me I'd never amount to anything and walked out the door. I had spent 23 years learning how to live underneath that word. Margaret put her hand on my forearm. Just briefly. She didn't look at me. She was looking at her briefcase, which sat between her feet on the floor, and inside that briefcase was an envelope I had not yet seen the contents of. She had told me about it only that morning. She had told me my father had given it to her 11 days before he died, with specific instructions about when to open it. The judge, a woman named Helen Carver, mid-60s, sharp-eyed, looked down at her notes and then up at Margaret. Counsel for the respondent. Your opening. Margaret stood. She is 61 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, grey hair cut short, glasses she never pushes up because they never slide down. She had been my father's attorney for 26 years. Your Honor, she said, before I respond to Mr. Whitfield's characterization of his sister, and before I address the validity of the will, I would ask the court's permission to introduce a document into evidence that the late Thomas Whitfield asked me, in writing, to read aloud in any legal proceeding where the validity of his final wishes was contested. He prepared this document himself. He sealed it himself. He told me, in his own words, that this letter was to be opened only if his son ever stood in a courtroom and said exactly what his son just said. The courtroom got quieter than I had ever heard a room get. Daniel's smile didn't move. But his eyes did. And mine, for the first time since I had walked into that building, went dry. To understand how I ended up sitting in that courtroom, you have to understand who my brother thought I was. Because for most of my life, I let him think it. We grew up on the farm. 312 acres of red Georgia clay and pecan trees, and a creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property. Our father, Thomas Whitfield, was a quiet man. He had served in Vietnam, come home, married our mother, taken over the farm from his own father, and never spoken much about any of it. He was not cold. He was just careful with his words. When he did speak, you listened. Our mother, Linda, was the opposite. She talked constantly. She had opinions about everyone in the county, and most of those opinions were unkind. She loved Daniel openly. She loved me in a quieter, more conditional way, the kind of love that came with a clipboard. She kept score. Daniel was the golden one from the beginning. Football, student council, a partial scholarship to the University of Georgia, a business degree, a job in commercial real estate, a wife from a family that owned a regional bank, 2 children. A house in a gated community outside Atlanta. Every milestone was photographed and framed and mounted on the wall of our parents' dining room. Every milestone became a story our mother told at church. I was different. I had been a quieter child. I read books. I helped my father in the barn. I was the one who sat with him on the porch in the evenings while he drank his coffee and didn't say anything, and I learned, slowly, that silence between 2 people who love each other is not the same as silence between strangers. I went to nursing school because my mother told me to. I dropped out in my 3rd semester because I didn't want to be a nurse, and I had been too afraid to say so. I came home. I worked at a feed store. I met a man named Brian. I married him at 23. He left me at 29 for a woman who managed a tanning salon in Warner Robins. I didn't fight him. I let him take the house, the better car, and most of the furniture. I moved into a rental. I went back to work. My mother died of a stroke in 2016. My father stayed on the farm. Daniel called him once a month, mostly to talk about the value of the land. I drove out to the farm every Saturday. I made him lunch. I cleaned his kitchen. I sat with him on the porch. That was the part Daniel never saw. That was the part my brother chose to forget. For 9 years, every Saturday, I drove 43 miles each way to sit with my father. I did his laundry. I took him to doctor's appointments. I learned how to refill his prescriptions, how to manage his diabetes, how to recognize the early signs of the heart condition that would eventually take him. I balanced his checkbook. I called the insurance company when bills came in wrong. I sat with him through the long, slow afternoons when he could no longer walk to the creek. I never told Daniel any of this. I never asked him to help. I never asked him to come home. And when our father died in March of this year, on a Sunday morning, with my hand on his shoulder, I was the one who called the funeral home. I was the one who picked out the casket. I was the one who wrote the obituary. Daniel flew in for the funeral. He stood at the front of the church and gave a eulogy that mentioned himself 11 times. I counted. He hugged me at the graveside and whispered, "We'll talk about the estate next week, okay? Don't worry about anything." 3 weeks later, he filed the petition to contest the will. And here is the thing he didn't know, the thing I had not told anyone, not even Margaret, until the day before the hearing. For the last 4 years of my father's life, I had been doing something else on those Saturdays. Something my father had asked me to do. Something he had paid me, quietly, to do, not in cash, but in instruction. In knowledge. In a slow, patient education that he conducted from his recliner in the living room, with a yellow legal pad on his lap and a pen in his hand. But I'm getting ahead of myself. A farm was never just a farm. That was the first thing my father taught me, the year I turned 37 and started spending real time with him. It was October. I had driven out on a Saturday morning, expecting to do the usual, lunch, laundry, a walk to the mailbox if his hip was cooperating. Instead, he met me at the door with his coat on. "Get in the truck," he said. "I want to show you something." We drove for 40 minutes, out past the county line, into a stretch of pine forest I had never paid attention to. He pulled off onto a dirt road. He stopped the truck at the edge of a clearing. There was a small wooden sign, weathered, with the words "Woodfield Tract" burned into it. "This is ours too," he said. I didn't understand. He took out his wallet and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a deed. My father owned, in addition to the 312 acres of the home farm, 4 other parcels of land, scattered across 3 counties, totaling another 640 acres. Timberland, mostly. Some of it leased to a paper company. Some of it sitting on top of a mineral rights agreement that had been signed in 1979 and renewed every 10 years since. "Your mother never wanted to know about this," he said. Daniel never asked. He always assumed the farm was the farm. But the farm was always the smallest part. I asked him why he was telling me. He looked at me for a long time. He had pale blue eyes, my father, and when he looked at you directly, it felt like being seen for the first time. "Because you're the one who sat with me," he said. "And because somebody in this family has to know what's actually here. I'm tired of pretending it doesn't exist." That was the beginning. Every Saturday after that, for 4 years, my father taught me about the land. He showed me the leases. He showed me the timber contracts, the mineral rights, the easement agreements with the county. He took me to meet his accountant, a man named Earl Brennan, who had been managing my father's affairs since 1988. He took me to meet Margaret Hill. He introduced me to the manager at the regional bank where he kept his accounts. He walked me through every fence line of every parcel, in his slow, careful way, until I knew the property as well as I knew my own face. "Daniel thinks I'm just a farmer," he said to me one afternoon, the 2 of us sitting on the tailgate of his truck at the edge of Tract 4. "Daniel thinks I'm a sentimental old man who's going to leave him the family land and a savings account. Daniel doesn't know what I'm worth." Daniel never asked. He turned to look at me. "You never asked either, Rachel. But you showed up. There's a difference." I didn't know what to say. I had spent my whole life being the one who didn't measure up. The one without the degree, without the marriage, without the career, without the children. And here was my father, telling me, in his quiet way, that he had been watching all along, that he had been keeping his own kind of score, and that on his ledger. The numbers ran differently than my mother's had. He started having me sit in on meetings. He started forwarding mail to me. He started, slowly, putting my name on things, not as an owner yet, but as a contact. As a person who would be notified. As a person who would know. By the time he was diagnosed with congestive heart failure in January of last year, I had spent 3.5 years learning to manage an estate that, on paper, was worth somewhere north of $4 million. The home farm alone, with its frontage on the new state highway that had been approved in 2022, was worth more than Daniel had ever guessed. The timber rights were worth more again. And there was a piece of the mineral rights contract that was about to come up for renegotiation, with a clause my father had quietly added in 2009 that almost no one in the family knew about. My father didn't tell Daniel any of this. I asked him once why he didn't. He looked at me, and he said something I have thought about every day since. Because the moment Daniel knows what's here, he stops being my son and becomes my heir. And I'd like to die with a son. He never got to. Daniel never called him in those last months. Daniel was too busy. The land, to Daniel, was the farm, 312 acres, sentimental value, a check waiting at the end. He had no idea what he was actually about to fight me for. And he had no idea what was in the letter. I found out Daniel was contesting the will from a process server. A young man in a polo shirt who knocked on my door on a Thursday evening, asked my name, handed me an envelope, apologized, and left. I sat at my kitchen table and read the petition twice. Then I called Margaret. She already knew. Daniel had sent her office a courtesy copy, the way attorneys sometimes do, more as a power move than as a professional gesture. She told me to come to her office the next morning. I drove down to Macon at 7 a.m. Margaret's office is on the second floor of a building that used to be a dry goods store in the 1920s. She has a window that looks out onto the courthouse square. She had coffee waiting for me, the way she always did. His making 3 arguments, as she said, sliding a copy of the petition across the desk. Undue influence. Diminished capacity. And his contesting the executor designation. I asked her what that meant in plain English. It means his claiming you manipulated your father into changing the will, that your father wasn't mentally competent when he signed it. And that you shouldn't be the executor of the estate because you have a conflict of interest. I asked her if he could win. She took her glasses off, cleaned them with the corner of her cardigan, put them back on, and looked at me. Rachel, your father signed that will in my office, with 2 witnesses present, one of whom was his cardiologist. He passed a competency evaluation 11 days before he signed it. He drafted the language himself. He told me, on the day he signed it, exactly why he was leaving the bulk of the estate to you. There is no scenario in which Daniel wins this case on the merits. I asked her then why he was filing it. She looked at me for a long moment. Because he doesn't know what he's fighting for. He thinks this is about 300 acres and a savings account. He thinks if he applies enough pressure, you'll settle. He thinks you're afraid of him. I sat with that for a minute. Am I? I asked. She smiled, for the first time that morning. You tell me. I drove home that afternoon and I thought about it. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about every Christmas dinner where Daniel had told a joke at my expense and our mother had laughed. I thought about the time, when I was 24 and recently married, that Daniel had taken Brian aside at a barbecue and told him, as she'll never make anything of herself, you know. You're going to have to carry her. Brian told me that, 2 years later, the night before he left. I thought about my father's funeral, and Daniel standing at the front of the church, talking about himself. I thought about whether I was afraid of my brother. The answer, when I finally got to it, surprised me. I wasn't afraid of him. I was tired of him. There is a difference. I called Margaret back that evening. I told her we would not be settling. I told her we would be going to court. She said, "E good. Your father told me you would say that." I asked her what else my father had told her. She said, Rachel, there's a letter. He wrote it the week before he died. He gave it to me with very specific instructions about when to open it. I'm not going to tell you what's in it yet. I want you to walk into that courtroom without knowing. I want your reaction to be real. Your father wanted that too. I asked her why. She said, because your brother is going to say things in that courtroom that he can't take back. And your father wanted you to hear what he had to say about it. In his own words. After. Not before. I didn't push her. I trusted her. I had trusted her since the first time my father had introduced us, for years earlier, and she had shaken my hand and said, Your father talks about you more than you know. I went home and I waited for the hearing. The hearing was scheduled for the first week of September. Daniel and I did not speak in the months leading up to it. He sent me one text, in late July, which read, We can still settle this without lawyers. Call me. I did not respond. He called our cousin Pamela, instead. Pamela is our father's sister's daughter, 2 years older than me, a real estate agent in Athens. She and I had been close as girls and grown apart as adults, the way cousins often do. She called me a week before the hearing. Rachel, she said, I just want you to know that Daniel called me. He's been calling everyone. He's telling people that you isolated your father in his last year. That you wouldn't let any of us visit. That you cut off the phone. I asked her what she had said to him. There was a pause on the line. I told him the truth, she said. I told him that I called Uncle Tom every month, and that I visited at Christmas, and that not one time did I ever see you do anything but take care of him. I told him that the only reason none of us came around more was because we were lazy, and we knew you were handling it, and we let you. I told him I wasn't going to lie for him in court. I thanked her. She said, Rachel. Be careful. He's not just angry. He's scared. I don't know why, but he's scared. And scared people do worse things than angry people. I asked her what she thought he was scared of. She said, I don't think it's about the money. I think it's about being seen. I think he's spent his whole life believing he was the favorite, and the world told him he wasn't, and he can't survive that. So he has to prove it isn't true. I thought about that for a long time after I hung up. It was the closest anyone had come, in 20 years, to explaining my brother to me. The next week, I drove out to the farm. I hadn't been there since 2 weeks after the funeral, when I had spent a long Saturday cleaning out the refrigerator and packing up my father's clothes. The house felt different without him in it. It felt smaller. It felt like a house that was waiting. I went into my father's study. His desk was the way he had left it, a yellow legal pad, a coffee mug with the bottom inch of cold coffee still in it, a pair of reading glasses, a fountain pen. I sat in his chair. I looked out the window at the pecan trees. There was an envelope on the desk that I had not noticed before. It was addressed to me, in my father's handwriting, but it had been opened. Inside was a single page, dated 3 weeks before his death. Rachel. If you're reading this, it means you came back to the house. I knew you would. I want you to know 3 things. 1. I'm proud of you. I have always been proud of you. I was not always good at saying so, and that is my failure, not yours. 2. Your brother is going to make a mess. Let him. Margaret knows what to do. 3. The farm is yours, but more than that, the work you and I did together for 4 years is yours. You earned it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I love you, baby girl. Dad. I sat in that chair and I cried for the first time since the funeral. I cried for a long time. And when I was done, I folded the letter, I put it in my coat pocket, and I drove home. I didn't know, then, that this was not the letter. This was just a letter. The letter, the one Margaret had in her briefcase, was something else. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in a navy blue suit I had bought at a department store outlet 3 years earlier for a co-worker's funeral. It still fit. I wore my mother's pearl earrings, which had been the only thing she left me. I drove to Macon. I parked in the public lot. I walked into the courthouse alone, because Margaret had said it would be better that way. Daniel was already there when I arrived. He was standing in the hallway outside the courtroom with his attorney, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a tie clip shaped like a small golf club. They were laughing about something. Daniel saw me, stopped laughing, and walked over. Rachel, he said. We can still end this. I'm willing to go 50-50 on the farm. You take the house and 150 acres. I take the rest. We sell the timber tract and split it. You keep the savings. You keep the truck. We walk out of here as a family. I looked at him. He had the same smile. Daniel, I said, I haven't been a family with you in a long time. I'm not sure I ever was. His smile changed. Just slightly. He looked, for a second, like he was going to say something cruel. Then he turned and walked back to his attorney. Margaret arrived a moment later. She put her hand on my shoulder. You okay? I'm okay. Remember what I told you. Don't react. Don't speak. Don't interrupt. He's going to try to provoke you. Let him. I nodded. We went inside. The hearing began at 9:15. Judge Carver took the bench at 9:17. Daniel's attorney went first, and he was good, I'll give him that. He laid out the case carefully. He brought up my father's medications. He brought up the timing of the will. He brought up my Saturday visits and characterized them, with a slight twist of phrasing, as a pattern of isolation. He called me, twice, a primary caregiver with unsupervised access. Margaret took notes. She did not object. She had told me she wouldn't. Let him build the picture, she had said. He's building it on sand. Then Daniel stood up. He was not required to make a statement. His attorney had not asked him to. But he stood up anyway, and he asked the judge for permission to address the court directly, and the judge, perhaps curious, perhaps tired, allowed it. And he said what he said. He called me a failure. He called our father confused. He called the will a mistake. He sat down with that smile back on his face, and his attorney leaned over and whispered something, and Daniel nodded. And then Margaret stood up. She did not raise her voice. She has never raised her voice in her life, as far as I can tell. She simply stood up, smoothed the front of her cardigan, and addressed the court. Your Honor, before I respond to Mr. Whitfield's characterization of his sister, and before I address the validity of the will, I would ask the court's permission to introduce a document into evidence that the late Thomas Whitfield asked me, in writing, to read aloud in any legal proceeding where the validity of his final wishes was contested. He prepared this document himself. He sealed it himself. He told me, in his own words, that this letter was to be opened only if his son ever stood in a courtroom and said exactly what his son just said. The courtroom went quiet. Judge Carver looked at Margaret. Then at Daniel. Then at Daniel's attorney. Then back at Margaret. Counsel, do you have an affidavit attesting to the chain of custody of this document? I do, Your Honor. Notarized. Witnessed by Dr. Howard Klein, the decedent's cardiologist, and by my paralegal, Susan Reyes. Also on file is a video recording of Mr. Whitfield sealing the envelope on August 17th of last year, in which he states on camera his intentions for the document and his mental state at the time of sealing. Daniel's attorney stood up. Your Honor, we object. This is highly irregular. We have no foundation for this document. We have no idea what it contains. It could be anything. Judge Carver looked at him. Counsel, your client just delivered a 4-minute statement to this court that was not on the schedule, and I allowed it. I will allow opposing counsel the same courtesy. Sit down. He sat down. Margaret reached into her briefcase. She took out an envelope. It was a standard manila envelope, sealed with red wax, with my father's signature across the seal. I had never seen it before in my life. She held it up for the judge to see. Then she broke the seal. I watched my brother's face. For the first time that morning, his smile was gone. Margaret unfolded the pages. There were 4 of them, typed, with my father's signature at the bottom of the last page and his initials at the bottom of each of the others. She cleared her throat. This document is dated August 17th of last year. It is titled simply, A Letter from Thomas Whitfield, to be read in the event my son contests the will. I will read it in full, as Mr. Whitfield requested. She began to read. To Judge Carver, or whichever judge has the misfortune of hearing this case. To my daughter Rachel, who I hope is sitting in your courtroom right now. And to my son Daniel, who I know is the one who brought us all here. Daniel shifted in his seat. My name is Thomas Whitfield. I am 78 years old. I am of sound mind, as attested by my physician and by my attorney. I am writing this letter because I know my son. I have known him for 42 years. And I know that the moment my will is read, he will believe it is a mistake. He will believe his sister tricked me. He will not believe that I knew what I was doing. So I am writing this so that there is no question. I am leaving the home farm, the 4 additional land tracts, the timber leases, the mineral rights, the bank accounts, and the executorship of my estate to my daughter Rachel Whitfield. I am leaving my son Daniel a sum of $100,000, my 1987 Ford F-150, and the contents of the gun cabinet in the study. These are not arbitrary decisions. I will explain each of them. Margaret paused. She took a sip of water from a glass on the table. She looked at me. Then she continued. Daniel. Son. I want to address you directly, because you are the reason this letter exists. If you are hearing these words, it means you stood in a courtroom and said something about your sister that you should not have said. I do not know what you said. But I know you. So I can guess. You probably told the court that Rachel is a failure. You probably told them she has no career, no money, no marriage, no children, no achievements. You probably told them I was confused or manipulated. You probably said it with that smile you have worn since you were 6 years old, the one your mother used to tell me made you look like a leading man. And I used to tell her made you look like a boy who had not yet been told no. I heard a small sound from across the aisle. Daniel had inhaled sharply. So let me tell you what your sister actually is. And let me tell you what I actually did with my life. Because you do not know either of those things, and that is partly my fault, and partly yours. For the last 4 years of my life, your sister drove 43 miles every Saturday to sit with me. She did not ask for anything. She did not complain. She did not make me feel like a burden. She took me to my doctor's appointments. She managed my medications. She balanced my checkbook. She sat with me on the porch when I could no longer walk to the creek. She held my hand on the morning your mother died, and she held my hand on the morning I died, although you will not read this until after that has happened. Margaret's voice was steady. I could not look at her. I was looking at the wood grain of the table in front of me. For the last 4 years of my life, I also taught your sister something. I taught her about the land. The real land. Not just the home farm. The 4 other tracts. The timber leases with Georgia Pacific. The mineral rights agreement with Southern Natural, which is up for renegotiation next year, and which contains a clause your grandfather and I added in 1979 that I do not believe the company's current counsel is aware of. I taught her about the accounts. I introduced her to Earl Brennan, my accountant, and to Margaret Hill, my attorney, and to Howard Klein, my doctor, and to David Sherman, my banker. I introduced her to everyone who would need to know her after I was gone. Daniel, I never introduced you to any of them. Do you know why? Because you never asked. In the last 10 years of my life, you called me an average of 11 times per year. I kept a log. I am not telling you this to shame you. I am telling you because it is true, and because in a courtroom, the truth matters. You called me on my birthday. You called me on Father's Day. You called me at Christmas. You called me when you needed something, when you were buying the house in Sandy Springs, when your wife's father had his heart attack, when your son was applying to college and you wanted me to write a letter. I wrote the letter. I always wrote the letter. You did not call me to ask how I was. Your sister called me every night. Every night, Daniel. For 9 years. After your mother died. She called me at 7:30 in the evening, and we talked for 45 minutes, and she never missed a night, even when she had the flu, even when her car broke down, even when her hot water heater flooded her kitchen. She called me from a hotel room in Savannah once when she was at a bookkeeping conference, and she apologized for being late. That is who my daughter is. And that is who you called a failure. Margaret stopped for a moment. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the second hand of the wall clock. Now let me tell you what I did with my life, because you do not know that either. The home farm is 312 acres. You know that. The 4 other tracts total 640 acres. You did not know that. The mineral rights agreement, which I quietly renegotiated in 2009 with terms favorable to our family, has produced an average annual income of $140,000 for the last 15 years. Deposited into an account at First National of Macon under the entity name Whitfield Holdings, LLC, which I established in 1988 and which you have never heard of. The current balance of that account, as of last month, is approximately $1,600,000. The timber lease with Georgia Pacific has produced an additional income stream that I will not detail here, but which is documented in the attached financial summary, which Margaret will provide to the court as Exhibit C. I heard, somewhere behind me, a small gasp. I did not turn around. The total estimated value of the estate, Daniel, is approximately $4,200,000. Not 300 acres and a savings account. $4,200,000. And I am leaving all of it, except for the items I have specified, to your sister. Not because I love her more than I love you. I do not. I love you both. But because she is the one who showed up. And because she is the one I trusted with what I had built. And because when I tested her, over for years, with information, with responsibility, with access, she never once asked me what was in it for her. Not one time. She just kept showing up. Every Saturday. For 4 years. That is not a failure, Daniel. That is the opposite of a failure. That is the only definition of success that ever mattered to me. Margaret turned to the last page. Your Honor, if my son is contesting this will on grounds of undue influence or diminished capacity, I would like the court to know the following. I drafted this letter myself. I drafted the will myself, in consultation with Margaret Hill. I passed a cognitive evaluation administered by Dr. Howard Klein on August 6th of last year, the results of which are on file. I recorded a video statement on August 17th, also on file, in which I stated on camera my intentions and my reasoning. I am not confused. I am not medicated beyond what is medically necessary. I am not being manipulated. I am a man who has decided how he wishes to leave the world, and I am doing it on my own terms. To my daughter, Rachel, if you are reading this in a courtroom, I am sorry. I am sorry that it had to come to this. I am sorry that your brother could not be a better brother. I am sorry that I could not protect you from this last humiliation. But I want you to know that everything I gave you, you earned. Every dollar. Every acre. Every responsibility. You earned it on the porch with me. You earned it in the doctor's offices. You earned it on the phone every night at 7:30. You earned it. And to my son, Daniel, I love you. I have always loved you. But I will not lie for you, even from the grave. You called your sister a failure in a courtroom. I am calling you, from beyond it, exactly what you are. You are a man who confused being praised with being good. And there is still time, if you want it, to become something better. But you will have to do it without my land, and without your sister's forgiveness, until you have earned both. Signed, Thomas Whitfield. August 17th. Margaret lowered the pages. The courtroom did not move. For a long moment, no one spoke. Not the judge. Not Daniel's attorney. Not Daniel. The only sound was the clock. Then I heard my brother make a small noise. A sound I had never heard him make before. It was not a sob. It was not a word. It was the sound of a man who had walked into a room he thought he knew and discovered that the floor was not where he had left it. Judge Carver was the first to move. She set her pen down. She looked at Margaret. She looked at Daniel's attorney. She looked at Daniel. Counsel for the petitioner, she said. Do you wish to proceed with your case? Daniel's attorney stood up slowly. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, we would like to request a brief recess to consult with our client. Granted. 30 minutes. She rose. We all rose. She left through the door behind the bench. The bailiff stepped to the side. The courtroom began, slowly, to fill with the sound of people whispering. Margaret turned to me. Are you all right? I nodded. I did not trust my voice yet. She put her hand on mine. Take a walk. Get some air. I'll find you in the hall in 20 minutes. I stood up. I walked out of the courtroom without looking at my brother. I walked down the hallway. I went outside, into the small park behind the courthouse, and I sat on a bench under a magnolia tree, and I let myself feel everything I had not let myself feel for years. I cried, but quietly. I cried for my father. I cried for the version of my brother who had been my brother once, when we were small, before our mother had taught him that he was special and taught me that I was not. I cried for the years I had spent believing the word that he had called me in that courtroom. And I cried, finally, because my father had seen me. He had seen me the whole time. And he had left me, in that envelope, the proof. When I came back inside, Daniel was standing in the hallway, alone. His attorney was on the phone, 20 feet away. Daniel saw me. He took one step toward me. He stopped. "Rachel," he said. I waited. "I didn't know," he said. I looked at him for a long time. He looked smaller than he had that morning. He looked, for the first time in his life as far as I could remember, like a man who did not know what to say. "That's the part one can't forgive, Daniel," I said. "It's not that you said what you said. It's that you didn't know. For 41 years, you didn't know." I walked past him and back into the courtroom. When Judge Carver returned, Daniel's attorney stood up and announced that the petitioner was withdrawing his contest of the will. He cited new information. He cited his client's wish to avoid further proceedings. He used the word amicable, which I thought was generous of him. Judge Carver did not look impressed. She looked at Daniel. "Mr. Whitfield. Stand up, please." He stood. "I have presided over family disputes for 19 years. I am not unfamiliar with the cruelty that families are capable of in moments like this. I will tell you something that is not a legal ruling, but a personal observation. Your father, in his letter, gave you something that very few people are given. He told you the truth. About yourself. From beyond the grave. You can do with that what you wish. But I would suggest you do not waste it." Daniel nodded. He did not speak. "This contest is dismissed. The will stands as written. The court adjourns." She struck the gavel once. It was over. The estate took 7 months to settle. There was paperwork, and there were taxes, and there were meetings with Earl and Margaret and David at the bank. And there were 100 small decisions about what to keep and what to sell and what to lease and what to let lie. I did all of it. I did it the way my father had taught me, slowly, carefully, with a yellow legal pad on my lap and a pen in my hand. I quit the feed store in November. I did not quit because I was suddenly wealthy. I quit because I had work to do. Real work. The kind of work my father had been preparing me for. I hired a manager for the home farm, a young man named Caleb who had grown up 2 counties over and knew more about timber than anyone I had ever met. I renegotiated the mineral rights contract in February, and the clause my father had added in 2009 turned out to be worth, by Earl's calculation, an additional $320,000 per year for the next 10 years. I established a small scholarship in my father's name at the community college for students studying agriculture or business. I paid off the mortgage on Pamela's house, anonymously, because she had told me the truth when she had been asked to lie. I did not buy a new car. I did not buy a new house. I fixed the leaky faucet in my kitchen. I bought a better mattress. I started reading again, in the evenings, the way I had as a child. Daniel called me 3 times in the months after the hearing. The first time, I did not answer. The second time, I did not answer. The third time, in late November, I picked up. "Rachel," he said, "I'd like to come see you. If you'll let me." I thought about it for a long time before I answered. Not yet, Daniel. When? I don't know. There was a long silence on the line. Okay, he said. I'll wait. I do not know if he meant it. I do not know if he will wait. I do not know if I will ever want to see him. What I know is that my father was right, that there is still time, if Daniel wants it, to become something better. But it is not my job to walk him through that door. It is his. And whether he ever does will not change my life either way. His wife, Cynthia, did call me. She called in December. She apologized, in a careful, lawyerly way, for things she had said about me at family gatherings over the years. She did not ask for anything. She did not mention the estate. She asked if I would consider coming to her daughter Hannah's 18th birthday in March. Hannah was my niece. I had not seen her in 2 years. I said I would think about it. I did go. I sat at the back of a small restaurant in Sandy Springs and I watched my niece, who looked like her mother, open a card for me with a check in it. She walked across the room and hugged me. She said, Aunt Rachel. Daddy told me what happened. I'm sorry. I told her she had nothing to be sorry for. Daniel was at the party. He did not approach me. He nodded at me from across the room, once. I nodded back. That was all. In April, on a Saturday, I drove out to the farm. The pecan trees were beginning to leaf. The creek was high from the spring rain. I parked the truck, my father's truck, the 1987 F-150, which Daniel had been allowed to keep but had quietly signed over to me in December without comment, and I walked up to the house. The house was the same. I had not changed anything inside it. I had not been able to. The yellow legal pad was still on my father's desk. The coffee mug was still there, although I had washed it. The reading glasses were still folded next to the pen. I made a cup of coffee. I took it out onto the porch. I sat in the chair my father used to sit in, and I watched the pecan trees, and I thought about him. I thought about what he had written. That is not a failure, Daniel. That is the opposite of a failure. That is the only definition of success that ever mattered to me. I had spent 23 years carrying a word that other people had given me. Failure. My mother had given it to me first, with her clipboard and her ledger. My ex-husband had given it to me next, with his suitcase by the door. My brother had given it to me last, in a courtroom in Macon, with a smile on his face. And my father, in 4 pages of typed words read aloud by a woman in a cardigan, had taken it back from all of them. I do not believe that letter changed who I was. I believe it changed only what I would let other people decide about who I was. Those are different things. The first is a fantasy. The second is a choice. I had made it on the bench under the magnolia tree, while my brother stood in the hallway not knowing what to say. I will tell you what I learned, sitting on that porch with the coffee getting cold in my hand. I learned that the people who love you quietly are not always the ones who say it loudest. I learned that showing up, every Saturday, every phone call at 7:30, every doctor's appointment, every cold afternoon on a tailgate at the edge of Tract 4, that showing up is not nothing. It is, in fact, almost everything. I learned that you can spend your whole life being told you are less, and one quiet man with a yellow legal pad can undo all of it, if he loves you, and if he is paying attention. My father was paying attention. He was paying attention the whole time. I sat on the porch until the sun went down. I did not cry. I had done my crying. I drank my coffee. I listened to the creek. I thought about the work I would do next week, and the week after, and the year after that. I thought about Caleb, and the timber crew, and the new fence we were going to put up on the eastern boundary of Tract 3. I thought about Hannah, and the scholarship, and the small office I had rented in Macon to manage the holdings, with my name on the door, Rachel Whitfield, Managing Partner, Whitfield Holdings, LLC. I thought about my father. I thought about how he had known, for years before he died, what would happen. How he had known his son. How he had known me. How he had quietly, patiently, prepared the only daughter he had for a moment in a courtroom that he would not live to see. I thought about the last line of his letter. You will have to do it without my land, and without your sister's forgiveness, until you have earned both. He had not asked me to forgive Daniel. He had only said until. He had left that door open, in case I ever wanted to walk through it. I have not walked through it yet. I do not know if I ever will. But the door is there, and that is something, and it is mine to open or to leave closed. I stood up from the porch. I took my cup back into the kitchen. I washed it. I put it on the rack to dry. I turned off the lights. Before I left, I went into my father's study. I picked up the yellow legal pad. I sat down in his chair. I uncapped the fountain pen. I wrote one line at the top of the page. Saturday. The work continues. Then I closed the pad, put it back on the desk, locked the front door behind me, and drove home in the truck my father had taught me to drive on a dirt road 28 years ago. When I was 13 years old, and he had told me, for the first time, that I was the kind of girl who would do all right in this world. He had been right. He had been right the whole time.